A hukou is a record in the system of household registration required by law in the People's Republic of China. The system itself is more properly called huji, and has origins in ancient China. A household registration record officially identifies a person as a resident of an area and includes identifying information such as name, parents, spouse, and date of birth. A hukou can also refer to a family register in many contexts since the household registration record is issued per family, and usually includes the births, deaths, marriages, divorces, and moves, of all members in the family. Because of its entrenchment of social strata, especially as between rural and urban residency status, the hukou system is often regarded as a caste system of China. The system descends in part from ancient Chinese systems of household registration, which also influenced neighboring countries. In present times, a similar household registration system exists within the public administration structures of Japan, Vietnam, and North Korea. In South Korea, the huji system was abolished on January 1, 2008. While unrelated in origin, propiska in the Soviet Union had a similar purpose. Nomenclature: the formal name for the system is huji. Within the huji system, a hukou is the registered residency status of a particular individual in the system. Hukou is more commonly used in everyday conversation. Hukou has been adopted by English language audiences to refer to both the huji system and an individual's hukou. History: family registers were in existence in China as early as the Xia dynasty. In the centuries which followed, the family register developed into an organization of families and clans for purposes of taxation, conscription and social control. According to the examination of hukou in Wangxian Tongkao published in 1317, there was a minister for population management during the Zhou dynasty named Simin, who was responsible for recording births, deaths, emigrations and immigrations. The rights of sonnets that 3 copies of documents were kept in different places. The administrative divisions in Zhou dynasty were a function of the distance to the state capital. The top division nearest the capital was named Dubai, top division in more distant areas were named Xiang and Sui. Families were organized under the Beja system. Guanzong, prime minister of the Qi state 7th century BCE, imposed different taxation and conscription policies on different areas. In addition, Guanzong also banned immigration, emigration, and separation of families without permission. In the Book of Lord Shang, Shang Yang also described his policy restricting immigrations and emigrations. Xiao He, the first chancellor of the Han dynasty, added the chapter of Hu as one of the 9 basic law codes of Han, and established the hukou system as the basis of tax revenue and conscription. Household registration in China. The Communist Party instigated a command economy when it came to power in 1949. In 1958, the Chinese government officially promulgated the family register system to control the movement of people between urban and rural areas. Individuals were broadly categorized as a rural, or urban worker. A worker seeking to move from the country to urban areas to take up non-agricultural work would have to apply through the relevant bureaucracies. The number of workers allowed to make such moves was tightly controlled. Migrant workers would require 6 passes to work in provinces other than their own. People who worked outside their authorized domain or geographical area would not qualify for grain rations, employer-provided housing, or health care. There were controls over education, employment, marriage and so on. Rationale: with its large rural population of poor farm workers, hukou limited mass migration from the land to the cities to ensure some structural stability. The hukou system was an instrument of the command economy. By regulating labor, it ensured an adequate supply of low-cost workers to the plethora of state-owned businesses. Like the internal passports of the Soviet Union, the hukou system allowed the state to provide preferential treatment to industrial workers and intelligentsia who would be more likely to protest and even revolt during periods of unrest. For some time, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security continued to justify the hukou system on public order grounds, and also provided demographic data for government central planning. the Hukou system has been justified by some scholars as increasing the stability of China by better monitoring of targeted persons, people who are politically dubious by the party's standards. This is still a significant function as of 2006. Prior to the Chinese economic reform that began in the late 1970s, the system succeeded in limiting population growth in the cities. Enforcement: from around 1953 to 1976, police periodically rounded up those who were without valid residence permits, placed them in detention centers, and expelled them from cities. Administration regulations issued in 1982 known as custody and repatriation authorized police to detain people, and repatriate them to their permanent residency location. Although an individual is technically required to live in the area designated on his/her permit, in practice the system has largely broken down. After the Chinese economic reforms, it became possible for some to unofficially migrate and get a job without a valid permit. Economic reforms also created pressures to encourage migration from the interior to the coast. It also provided incentives for officials not to enforce regulations on migration. Technology has made it easier to enforce the Hukou system as now the police force has a national database of official Hukou registrations. This was made possible by computerization in the 1990s, as well as greater cooperation between the different regional police authorities. During the Great Leap Forward's famine, during the mass famine of the Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 1962, having an urban versus a rural Hukou could mean the difference between life and death. During this period, nearly all of the approximately 600 million rural Hukou residents were collectivized into village communal farms, where their agricultural output, after state taxes, would be their only source of food. With institutionalized exaggeration of output figures by local communist leaders and massive declines in production, state taxes during those years confiscated nearly all food in many rural communes, leading to mass starvation and the deaths of more than 30 million Chinese. The 100 million urban Hukou residents, however, were fed by fixed food rations established by the central government, which declined to an average of 1,500 calories per day at times but still allowed survival for almost all during the famine. An estimated 95% or higher of all deaths occurred among rural Hukou holders. With the suppression of news internally, many city residents were not aware that mass deaths were occurring in the countryside at all, which was essential to preventing organized opposition to Mao's policies. Many of the starving peasants tried to flee to the cities to beg for food, but tight security at entry points and through regular inspections of resident documents on the streets led to the deportation and subsequent death of most. In fact, it was only when rural family members of higher military officers, who were often isolated from the countryside in cities or bases, began dying from starvation that higher communist officials began seriously worrying about the stability of the state, and eventually forced Mao to end the program. This was the most extreme demonstration of how much impact a different Hukou could have in China, but significant interference in all aspects of life only began declining in the 1980s and 1990s. Effect on rural workers. The Hukou system is closely associated with social issues regarding migration in China and excludes migrant workers, also known as farm workers or peasant workers, from citywide social welfares in urban areas. From around 1953 to 1976, the restriction of a citizen's rights by his domicile caused rural citizens to be separated into an underclass. Urban citizens enjoyed a range of social, economic and cultural benefits that China's rural citizens did not receive. The ruling party did however make some concessions to rural workers to make life in rural areas more tolerable. From 1978 to 2001, while China changed from state socialism to market socialism, export processing zones were created in city suburbs and migrants, most of them female, worked there under conditions far below the contemporary standard of Western countries. There were restrictions upon the mobility of migrant workers that forced them to live precarious lives in company dormitories or shanty towns where they were exposed to abusive treatment. The impact of the Hukou system upon migrant laborers became onerous in the 1980s after hundreds of millions were ejected from state corporations and cooperatives. Since the 1980s, An estimated 200 million Chinese live outside their officially registered areas and under far less eligibility to education and government services, living therefore in a condition similar in many ways to that of illegal immigrants. The millions of peasants who have left their land remain trapped at the margins of the urban society. They are often blamed for rising crime and unemployment, and under pressure from their citizens, the city governments have imposed discriminatory rules. For example, the children of farm workers are not allowed to enroll in the city schools, and even now must live with their grandparents or other relatives in order to attend school in their hometowns. They are commonly referred to as the home-staying children. There are around 130 million such home-staying children, living without their parents, as reported by Chinese researchers. Reformation of Hukou has been controversial in the PRC. It is a system widely regarded as unfair by citizens of the PRC, but there is also fear that its liberalization would lead to massive movement of people into the cities, causing strain to city government services, damage to the rural economies, and increase in social unrest and crime. And yet, there has been recognition that Hukou is an impediment to economic development. China's accession to the World Trade Organization has forced it to allow reformation to Hukou in order to liberate the movement of labor for the benefit of the economy. Further relaxation of the system has happened since the 1990s. A provision was made to allow the rural resident to buy temporary urban residency permits so the resident could work legally within the cities. The fee for these permits decreased over time and have become reasonably affordable. The inheritance of Hukou was changed to allow succession through the lines of both the father and the mother, which corrected the disadvantage of Hukou against rural women. The Hukou has been further weakened since 2001. In 2003, after protests over the death of Sun Zigang alarmed the government, the laws of custody and repatriation were repealed. By 2004, over 100 million rural citizens were working in cities, according to the estimate of the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture. Chan and Buckingham's article, "Is China Abolishing the Hukou System?" argues that previous reforms have not fundamentally changed the Hukou system, but have only decentralized the powers of Hukou to local governments. The present Hukou system remains active and continues to contribute to China's rural and urban disparity. In March 2008, over 30 leading intellectuals wrote an open letter to the government, asking for the immediate abolition of the rural-urban dual Hukou system. Indiana, 2008-09, web-posted essays remarked the Hukou system as a caste system of China, and China a great country of discrimination. The system is currently only partially enforced, and it has been argued that the system will have to be further relaxed in order to increase availability of skilled workers to industries. On March 6, 2013, Premier Wen Jiabei called for speeding up reform of the Hukou system to advance urbanization actively, yet prudently. Premier Wen said this in a speech during the opening of the annual National People's Congress. Household registration in Taiwan. When Taiwan was under Japanese rule from 1895 to 1945, the Japanese government maintained the same system of household registration as they did in other parts of the Empire of Japan. This system of household registration, with minor changes, has been continued. Records concerning native Taiwanese are fairly complete. Records of mainlanders date back to the date they first applied for registration with the local household registration office, and are based on information provided by the applicant. While all ROC nationals can apply for a ROC passport, proper household registration is required for obtaining a ROC ID card, which is often used as proof of citizenship, such as in national elections, and an ID number is needed to open bank accounts. Unlike in mainland China, residency can be easily changed with the local authorities, and household registration does not serve as a tool to limit a resident's movements within Taiwan. Special Administrative Regions. Hukou is not employed in the Special Administrative Regions of Hong Kong and Macau, though identification cards are mandatory for residents there. See also: Propiska, Internal Passport, Dangan, References, Specific Citations. General References, Wang DFK, Chang, YL, EXS. rural migrant workers in urban China, living a marginalized life. International Journal of Social Welfare 16, 32 euro 40 doi, 10.1111 per Joule 1468-2397.2007.00475 exa, external links, visa reciprocity and country documents finder, Taiwan from the United States Department of State, South Korea, male-oriented family registry system to change in 2008 from United Nations Public Administration Network, Hukou system in China from wangjinsuo.com, recent Chinese Hukou reforms from Congressional Executive Commission on China, getting your employees a Hukou euro. An unavoidable HR issue in China, a May 4, 2011 article from China-briefing.com.